Hello everyone, and welcome to your Masters in Management online learning. Through your online learning, I'll be your host. My name is Sandy, and we'll be having a series of interviews with the different lecturers of your course. Today we're going to be focusing on Module 1, which is about managing organizations and people. And today we're here with your lecturer for the course, Dr. Joseph Manlia, who will be sharing his expertise and knowledge on the topic. So, Dr. Manlia, thank you for being with us today.
Welcome.
And let's get right to the questions, shall we?
Yes.
Okay. So my first question is more about an introductory question, and it's, when do we start experiencing management? And are we managers?
So actually we are all born managers in my opinion. Why? Because mainly when we are babies and we are kids, we manage to attract a lot of people. Okay. For example, when we are babies, we start crying all over and we attract our parents. Mm-hmm. When we go to school, we start attracting friends, the attention of teachers, and what happens all around us. Moreover, our management skills, they will either start developing more, or by time they start diminishing. It depends on our behavior, on our culture, the influences around us, these kind of things. That for sure we'll talk about them later on during the course.
So my next question is very much debated in theories today. Would you say management is a science or an art or both?
Let's start with what is science. Science is mainly attracted towards principles. For example, water. Water is H2O. Nothing can change that kind of solution. Art is something where we experiment what we can do. We try to evolve something new, try to use different tools. And management is something similar to both of them. There are principles that cannot be changed. For example, a manager needs to take responsibility and takes over risks. But there are different styles which can change according to time. For example, the style which used to be adopted 20 years ago, it's changing nowadays because of influences and changes, for example, in technology. Mm-hmm. If we are adopting new technologies, we have to change the style how we used to manage 20 years ago. We have people who are working from home. How we are managing those people? What's the difference that we have nowadays from 20 years ago or from 1,000 years ago?
Mm-hmm. So let's speak about the different studies we can follow in management, such as Taylor's scientific management.
Yes, actually there are several scientific methods and several studies. For example, there is the administrative theory, which was developed by Weber, mm-hmm. which focus on the authority, loyalty, and this kind of stuff. However, there is one interesting study which was made by Fayol, mm-hmm. where he mentioned 14 points of management profile. And in these points that he mentioned, he introduced us to three important things: motivation, specialization, and HR management, which was taken for granted that we don't need to motivate people, we just order people. Mm-hmm. But nowadays, with the kind of behavior, influences around us, we need to motivate people. We need people which are specializing in different skills. And there is a lot of work to be done by the HR management as well. For example, performance management skills, training, behavioral skills, team building, all these kind of stuff. One of the main things which is happening as well in several organizations, it's the team building exercises, which we used to lack several years ago, but nowadays it's important to get people together, especially when we have people who are working remotely. Yeah. And the only way to get people in a different way is by organizing these kind of team spirit, team motivation exercises together. There are additional studies. For example, the XY theory by McGregor, which is mainly the X theory. Let's divide it into the X theory. It's the one which is focused on the traditional styles, while the Y theory is much more motivated towards new skills, innovation, and what's happening nowadays.
Okay.
There is also the Maslow theory, which is very famous, where you have the basic skills going up the 5 levels of it. We'll talk in much detail later on. And there is the Boulding theory, which introduced systems management and computer engineering, which is relatively new when compared to the time of management that we had studied for.
Okay, all right. Would you say that these theories still apply in today's organizations, or would you say we're influenced by other disciplines?
They are evolving. Why they are evolving? We are using technology, new different ways of communication. 30 years ago, we didn't have the internet, so no emails, no communication. The only communication was through letters, either call a person or go directly to a person. Nowadays, if you are going to organize, for example, a meeting or a conference, you are just can be sitting in your kitchen, in your office, at home, or wherever you like, and you just do, for example, a Skype or a conversation through a mobile. So yes, they are evolving, but still the basic principles still are there.
Okay, thank you. Okay, next I would like to go on to something a bit slightly different. My question is, what is governance?
So, governance is mostly related to the what do we need to achieve.
Okay.
It's not to the nitty-gritties how we are going to achieve, but to the what. It's mostly related to the mission statement. It gets updated by time, but it's not something which gets updated, like, for example, the strategy or the management, how we are going to the things. It's something which sometimes it's a bit vague, but it helps us to reach the objectives that we need along the time. It depends on the organization. For example, if it's a bank, for example, we need to lower the interest rates for lending so that we can attract people. But we don't have the figures. So the figures comes in the next step, where we have the management type. Okay. So governance is on the top. It's the holistic approach.
Okay. And what would you say the difference is between governance and management?
So in governance, we are answering the what. We are looking towards a holistic picture of our organization. While management, we focus on the how we are going to the things. Who is they going to take care for a project which is going to take 3 years? What are the objectives of that project? That's the main difference. One of the important things to link both the governance and the management is good communication. Otherwise, we start lacking communication between the people who are managing or the people who are building the governance and the lower level people who are going to execute those parts of that strategy.
Okay, so it's like governance is the strategy, whereas the management is how to achieve that strategy. Would you say that would be the
governance is mostly related to, for example, the board of directors, where the board of directors, for example, let's say a central bank or the European Central Bank, they state that they need to have stability in prices. It's vague. No one knows what stability means and what is the stability in prices. But actually the management needs to execute that part of the mission statement and how it's going to be executed. For example, if we need to manage price stability, we need to reduce the interest rate or may increase the interest rate. That's part of the management.
Okay, all right, thank you. Are there any governing styles to mention, and what would be the main functions?
Mainly, the governing styles depends on the culture, the business type that we are going to run, the size both of the organization and our audience. Because, for example, if it's a small organization which provides loads of information to people, we are going to influence a lot of people through a small number of people. And it also depends on the ownership. who is going to own that kind of strategy, that governance that is going to take place. Today, we have something which is happening through the millennials.
Okay.
What's happening? Actually, there are people who want to work online, not going to the office. Their office is totally remotely. It's either by the sea, when they are on holiday, they can work from home. It's totally different. So we have the same governance, which is going to apply it differently, but we need the same results.
Yes.
Then we have the WOTs, which are the functional governance. And the WOTs mainly depends on what we determine to reach. Determine the objectives, the ethics, the behavior. We need to create a culture. For example, if we are not meeting physically in an office, what type of culture are we going to create to communicate to each other? We need to ensure that responsibility is always kept by the management. Sometimes managers try to delegate responsibility, but actually the owners are the managers themselves. You can delegate work, not responsibility. For example, how we're going to ensure compliance, how we're going to minimize risk, or how we're going to control risk. Those are all parts of the functional governance. Then we have the organization behavior. The organization behavior, mostly it depends on the mission statement, on the vision, and how it's going to take place, the strategy. That's all about supporting the governance, the mission statement that we are going to apply and achieve.
Okay, thanks. Since we're mentioning organizations, what influences organizations in general?
Mainly, we can split them in two. There are the organizational ethics, which is mainly focused on the behavior, the integrity, honesty, the competence, how it's being run, the sustainability, conformance, all these kind of things. It's totally behavior of the organization. Then we have the culture. And the culture is influenced by the boundaries within the organization and even the outside boundaries. But mainly, the organizational culture, it's about the leadership. What style of leadership are we going to apply within our organization? The openness and transparency. For example, if we have a military organization, it's totally secret from one group to another. But if we have a small organization, which are having people working together, for example, an IT company, where you have flat organizations, the type of communication is totally different. The fairness, the risk that we are going to take, the confidence and respect, these are all part of the cultures which develops the accountability and the responsibility within the organization.
Okay. And what are the best practices in relation to governance which could be applied?
Let's divide them in four. We have the strong qualified governing body, who is the sole responsible for the governance, who needs to develop the governance but influence his management to execute that mission statement, for example. And one of the important things is that at all levels of the organization, if we need to have the governing body still working on, we need to have challenges, ask questions, and then an independent board who takes sole responsibility of that governance. You cannot mix governance with the management of it and everything else. You need to create gaps in between. Why? Because you need to have the sole responsibility and management of what is presented to you on that particular plate. Okay. Then we need to define the roles. It's important to define roles, not in a vague way. For example, you are going to be responsible for that kind of project. What's your responsibility within that time frame? We need to delegate as well. As I mentioned before, not delegating responsibility, but delegating our tasks. And it's important to delegate, not to own everything, because when you own everything, you end up with a full plate that you cannot manage to eat. And your staff will not learn anything and cannot be innovative in the way they think. Something else, it's important to engage in the risk management. We need to evaluate, for example, projects, our daily running procedures, and evaluate the risk associated. Not to own the risk and take the full responsibility yourself. They may be channels how you escalate the responsibility. For example, there is a risk steering committee. But it's important to highlight and have different channels how you escalate or route those responsibilities.
And my next question is, what are organizations and how do they organize their structures?
Organizations are mainly a group of people who are working together. It depends on the size, the culture, the boundaries, the type of business they are going to make, the framework they are going to apply, legislation within the country they are working, the business pattern that they are going to adopt, or the business model. For example, let's take the example of Coca-Cola. They have a decentralized business model. Why? Because each country produces the product within their country. Each company have their own HR function, accountants, whatsoever. It's a total organization or a company on its own. But finally, they all answer to the same mother company. There are different types and setups of organizations as well. In our organization, we have the functional roles, for example, the board of directors, the HR department, finance department. Those are all which can take place as a function on their own. There is another pattern which can be taken, which in large countries is being applied, which is the divisional approach. Divisional approach is, for example, you have all the HR functions in Manhattan. You have all the financial aspects in New York.
Okay.
So it's totally divided according to the country to maximize efficiency and effectiveness. It depends on the size. Nowadays, we are having a lot the project-based and the team-based companies, which mainly sometimes having few people just ended their university, completed their university course, and they agree together that they will form a small company and start working together, which is mostly a flat organization, no hierarchies, no supervisors, managers, or whatsoever. But having people who assume different responsibilities. For example, someone is being responsible for the quality assurance, someone else is for the marketing, this kind of stuff. We have the network organizations, which are mainly autonomous, but they are linked and work together. We have the mechanistic structures, which are mostly related to military, police, this kind of stuff, where you have a lot of procedures, a lot of written procedures to follow. We have nowadays the technology-dominated companies as well, where they have research units, which we haven't seen some 30 years ago. But nowadays, with all this kind of technology, the behavior which is taking place, we need research teams to do research, for example, on marketing, on behavior, on people's behavior, on the user interfaces, all this kind of stuff. We have the market-dominated structures. For example, oil companies. If we mention oil companies, instantaneously we have British Petroleum, Shell, this kind of stuff, which can dominate the market. If they hike up the price, everyone will hike up the price. If they lower the price, everything will follow. Everyone will follow. We have the simple structures, similar to the flat structures that we mentioned, which are taking place, for example, in IT and these kind of companies. And we also have the alternative emerging structures are mainly focused of having people with different skills, for example, lawyers, architects, notaries, within the same building. So their business, though they are running their business on individual basis, but you can go in this kind of organization or this building and you can have the services that you require. For example, you need an architect for designing your home. Then you go to the architect to evaluate and do all the paperwork there within one roof. What are they influenced by? They're influenced by forces of the industry, and mainly the industry forces comes from the behavior, the culture of the country and the culture of the people, the type of business which is running in that particular country, the environment, systems available, flexibility of government, for example, how much helping schemes can be applied for them to help them finance. There are the boundaries as well, which influence, and the structures both within organizations and even in the supporting industries around. For example, if we are talking about locally, we have different organizations freely open to help and market themselves and to influence others. If we go to China, which is mostly regulated by the government, it's a different story. You have to go through all the channels of government, and from the government channels you will pass through other organizations as advised.
How do organizations evaluate themselves?
Mainly organizations are built on values, aspirations, what they would like to achieve, and why they were created. Let's take an example of the Scouts. For example, the Scouts, they are based on integrity, respect, care, belief, and cooperation. So their values are focused totally on those aspects. The aspiration, they work together, they want to achieve something together, and they do it. What are the reasons for being there? They want to engage and support towards positive thinking. That's a simple example on how Scouts work. What determines the organization, the creation of an organization, for example? It's the business that they want to make, even if it's a non-profit organization, they have their own business. What are the type of customers that they want? What type of customers they are going to focus on, the strengths, and whether they are unique or not. For example, Scouts is something unique. So their competition is mainly from other social groups. But if it comes, for example, I want to create an IT company, it's totally different. Why? Because there is a lot of competition. We need to create something innovative, otherwise we are out of business from day one. All these are based on the mission statement that we earlier mentioned. Then we have the business scope, why we are there, and how we are going to operate. Mainly the business memorandum, the business plans that we create together, or it depends on the style of the organization. Each organization applies its own core values. For example, the philosophy. What's the thinking of the organization? What's the style of management that we are going to have? The type of responsibilities that we are going to apply. All these kind of stuffs. We also have the vision to empower. We need to empower people, otherwise we'll end up a productive organization. If we don't empower people, we are reducing our efficiency, our effectiveness, people becomes bored, and we start losing our strengths, and we build weaknesses rather than we build strengths. Collins and Hansen developed an interesting theory where they divide the mostly fixed aspirations of the organization, mainly the parts of the mission statement and what we have, which are mostly related to the values, vision, and the mission. Mm-hmm. And we have the specific, tangible things that we are going to focus on, which are the strategic priorities, in which areas are going to focus within these particular 3 years, 2 years, or whatsoever. We have the strategic objectives, and it's important as well to have action plans and what we call key performance indicators, the KPIs, because people nowadays, we don't accept it's good or bad. Mm-hmm. How much good, how much bad. We need to have figures. And the KPIs also help to measure our behavior, our strategy, how things are going along, especially when you have large projects which are being run for the first time and you don't have the kind of experience. All organizations have KPIs. If we want to make profit, we need KPIs, we need to measure that profit. And nowadays we are also introducing KPIs on the human aspect. Mm-hmm. In the beginning of the year, or it depends on the organization, we have the performance management system review with the people. We set the targets, we set the objectives. They are being reviewed, for example, every 3 months, 6 months, whatsoever. And finally, we are going to achieve a mark. What's important when we are having KPIs, that we have targets, and measurable targets, not something vague. For example, during this year, you need to upgrade 5 servers. Mm-hmm. You have something specific. But if I give you a target, you need to do what your manager assigns to you. It's something vague. How are you going to measure it? You don't have any measurements.
Mm-hmm. How is the organizational structure responsible for results?
Let's divide the organization structure in 3 parts. Mm-hmm. We have the top management, middle, and the first line managers. Mainly the first line managers are responsible for the operation, how things are being done, they are being done successful, where we are failing. We measure the failures, we measure the success, and we pass all that information upwards. And we pass it to the middle management. The middle management, they have the tactical goals. The tactical goals are mainly the defined outcomes that they need to achieve. In between the middle management and the top management, we have the strategic goals which are being set within the organization by the management, which is something much more on a long-term basis. Okay. What are the strategic goals? The strategic goals are mainly the support of the mission statement, which is applied to that particular organization. As I mentioned before, the most important thing is to have measurements and to set what we need to achieve. For example, nowadays we are hearing a lot about the green initiatives. Mm-hmm. We need to reduce, for example, the price of utility bills by 20%. How are we going to achieve that? Mm-hmm. So, on the management side, they can set their objectives, for example, by changing all the light fittings to make them much more efficient. Mm. But on the lower side of the people, the first line managers and the staff who support them, they need to take care, for example, not to leave all the lights during the night on. Mm. So there is that kind of cooperation between. Something else which needs to be applied is that we define both the time frames, the specific challenges and targets that we are going to achieve, and rewards. Rewards may be financial rewards, and schemes that are being applied within the organization. It's always important to define measurements. and what we need to achieve. Otherwise, we don't know how we are going to compare what we are achieving.
Okay. How would you say management should plan for their long-term strategy?
We have the management by objectives, which the management by objectives, we have the specific targets, how they're going to be achieved. We have the KPIs, we have the PMSs, the performance management systems that need to be applied. Some years ago, we didn't have this kind of KPIs, automated tools, PMSs. And in fact, Peter Drucker had made a study, and during his studies, he noted that 90% of the people within our organization are not aware of what are their objectives and what they need to achieve, which is shocking, 90%.
Something so simple.
But even nowadays, we have organizations, for example, who don't apply any performance management system, or they don't communicate and have exchange feedback between managers and their staff, which is very important. The management by objective, it features on and concentrate on the key results, profit or growth of the organization, and how to attain a maximization of results. It's important to focus on maximization of results. Why? The competition which takes place and the speed which other organizations can change their business model and be new competitors or way ahead of your organization, it's really taking place fast. How it's going to take place? We set goals, develop action plans, review the progress, and appraise overall performance. For example, in IT companies, locally it's not that much popular, but in foreign companies they adopt agile methodologies. What are these agile methodologies? One of the main rules of agile methodologies is that during the morning you have 10 minutes, 15 minutes, all your staff meeting over a coffee or whatever, and they state what they had done during the last day, what were their challenges, and what they are going to do today. Why we need those 15 minutes? Sometimes we have people who, especially new people, who end up with challenges which may be difficult to them. But other people within that same team may have already bypassed that challenge, so they can share information. And you may call people, participate, and it's important that you appraise your people for their achievements, both as a team and even as individuals. What are the benefits of management by business objectives? You manage resources much more better. And when you manage resources, it's both human resource and the resource of the company. The human resource aspect, sometimes we are not aware of the skills that people have. So we need to know people much better, because if our people are working in the environment that they like, they would perform much better and we can achieve better results and everyone is happier. We need to develop our personnel as well through training schemes, study schemes, team building exercises. We need to concentrate on the key result areas, especially when we have difficult areas that we need to innovate and change. Be sound oriented towards results and have the proper organizational channels and communication channels.
Dr. Mania, what are the functions of management?
So mainly the functions of management, some years ago we used to define four: the planning, organizing, directing and controlling.
Okay.
Nowadays we are introducing the staffing, which is related to staff. Why? Because the human resource, it's quite important. Let's start one by one. For example, the planning. It's going to be a strategic planning, long-term, tactical planning, which is the short-term. We need to be specific. We need to guide our people, give direction. It depends on the type of project. It's a single-based project. It's an organization-based project. What are the influences that we are going to have, the internal, external factors, and known methodologies which are going to be applied during our planning exercises. There are a lot of things which can take place. That's about the planning. When it comes to the organizational part, we need first thing to set the rules of the game. Mm-hmm. What's going to take place, how we are going to manage projects, how we are going to formalize our communication. Nowadays we are seeing as well something which is called RASKI, where you define the responsibilities, who is going to approve, who is going to support, whom we are going to consult, who are going to inform within the team, which helps us to both be much more efficient and communicate better. Okay. The delegation, not the responsibilities, as we stated before, but how we are going to delegate work. If, for example, you have a team leader, you are going to delegate to develop a particular module within an application. He's not going to do it himself, but he is going to give it to assign tasks to different people. The group activities that are going to take place, for example, the functions, who are the customers, the geographic area that we are going to work in, and the resources. The resources comes to the finance, human prioritization of, for example, we need a server or we need a printer. We give priority when we need stuff within our organization. That's the organizational part. Then we go to the staffing, which is something mainly related to the organization, but it's something new within our studies, where we need to identify any training skills which needs to take place, for example, prior to launching a new project. How we are going to engage people. Do we need new people to be engaged within our organization? We are going to outsource any services because we don't have the expertise and it's cheaper to outsource. Those are all parts which are taking place and being studied within the staffing area.
So it's like an assessment of the competencies within the organization.
In fact, one thing which is taking place in organizations today, we are assessing the skills required for a particular job, not the skills associated with a particular person. That's something secondary. But if we need, for example, a salesperson, what are the skills required? What are the competencies required? And when we evaluate people's competencies and skills, we compare them to the template that we created beforehand on that particular job. There is also one other important function for management, which is the directing, where you have to instruct people, guide people, provide policies and procedures, mentor the people that are working for you, and you need to coordinate and motivate people. It's important. Motivation is very much important in organizations because during motivation you make people love their job rather they work for the money. Something important is that when you are directing something, if you have a project which you are not convinced 100% that you are going to be successful in it, if it's going to fail, make it fail early. Why? Because it's less expensive. Projects do fail a project as early as possible if you are not convinced that you are going to achieve the targets. To complement all the mentioned functions, we have the controlling part. So the controlling part is where we create a mechanism that we follow industry standards, best practices, and with the controlling, having the principles that we are going to apply, we also set the timelines, the targets, goals, standards, any ISO standards we are going to use, how we are going to measure, and during the same particular phase, it's important to apply a tolerance percentage. Normally, a 10% tolerance is being applied in IT projects, for example. Why? People are maybe on leave, on sick. You need specific resources, for example, printers, servers, to be provided by a service provider. He is late. What are we going to do? We are going to stop the project. We are going to fail because of that. So the tolerance period should be applied. It's a peace of mind, sort of.
Okay. What are the roles of management?
Mainly, the roles of management, we can state it's critically analyze, assess, and apply changes as required. Okay. That's in short, but it's too vague. Mintzberg identifies 10 roles or behaviors which managers can undertake, and he categorized them in 3 parts. He categorized, one of them is the interpersonal roles, informational roles, and decision roles. And within each one, he split them accordingly. For example, the interpersonal role, a manager is a figurehead. He has the social responsibility. He is representing the whole team. He is responsible of the team and their families sometimes, because if you are not being responsible and you start losing income and you have to fire people, you are not just influencing Mr. A, but you are influencing Mr. A plus his family. Another important aspect of the interpersonal role is the leadership. Leadership is different from management. We'll see it later on. We need to lead people, and to lead people, you need followers. Otherwise, you are not leading. And you need also the skill of listening between internal teams, external providers. It depends on the type of business that we are running. On the informational roles aspect, Mintzberg identifies 3 other items as well: the monitoring, disseminator, and the spokesperson, which are also related to the first one, but specifically to monitoring a team, the productivity, seek the industry information, what's happening in other similar industries, how are they being more efficient, how they can compete to us, or how we compete to them, how we can be way ahead of them. This is the responsibility of how the manager executes his skills. He's a disseminator. The manager needs to communicate potential information, both nice information and the bad information as well. He's the sole person responsible for that team. And he's also a spokesperson for representation of his team and even to negotiate on behalf of his team. It doesn't mean because we are a manager, you are always saying 100%, you are 100% yes to your board of directors, for example. You need to challenge the people above, and you need to be 100% convinced that what you are saying and what you are going to challenge, you believe in those challenges. So you are there to negotiate on behalf of your team, of your people. The last one, which regards to the decision roles, the manager needs to be an entrepreneur. Why? Because you need to create, control change management, how you are going to do changes. There are different techniques also to be applied. You need to be a good listener. And to be a good listener, it's sometimes difficult. You not hear people, you listen to people and exchange. And where you believe it's white, you say it's white. When you believe that's black, it's black. Nowadays, we also have managers who run what we call JAD sessions, JAD, which stands for Joint Application Development, where you have people within a meeting room from different areas, from different departments who are working on the same, for example, project, who needs to exchange ideas between. And you get all the people around the same table, and unless you have feedback or decisions taken, no one will be out of that particular meeting room. The manager has the role of disturbance handler. Sometimes you have people who disturb the team. They are new, they are always protesting, they are always trying to sound, but you need to mediate and handle these disputes which may take place within the team. Sometimes the disputes are not created because of the work itself, but much more from the person, from his behavior, how he thinks of himself and his culture. Another role is the resource and how resource allocator, mainly how you fine-tune your resources, human aspect, resources, financial, tools, this kind of, all the resources within your remit. And you always need to be a negotiator. We already mentioned it before, but you have to be a negotiator to direct important decisions. As we said before, if a project is going to fail it as early as possible. You need to communicate that kind of information. Are you appropriate to communicate it? Are you going to be the friendly person who don't want to give that information and try to delegate it to people above you? All this kind of.
So my next question, Dr. Mania, is what skills are required to manage organizations?
Let's identify the difference between skills and management of skills. Skills, it's the ability, it's what we perform, while managerial skills is the capability of performing something successful. We all have skills, but we are not everyone is capable of executing those skills. Sometimes people are individuals who prefer to work on their own, they can manage their own boundaries, but when it comes to manage other people's, they fail. We develop managerial skills in activities such as, for example, teamwork, motivation, team building, decision making, negotiation, conflict resolution, leadership. These all help us. These are all skills required to develop our capabilities. We can divide the management levels in three parts: the top management, middle management, and the lower level. The lower level are the supervisors or team leaders. They need different skills. Let's start from the bottom part. At the bottom part, we need people who have the technical skills. We are developing, for example, we are producing drinks. We need the people who have the expertise in chemistry, who can do mixtures and whatsoever. So we have the technical skills there. Higher up, we have the middle management. Mainly the middle management is the link between the top and the lower part. And the middle management mainly focus on the outcomes, which is taken for granted, and the human aspect as well, where you need the human skills, how the behavior, the communication skills, how you are going to motivate people, how you are going to identify any gaps in the skills required, all this kind of things which are related to human. Then we have the top management. The top management is mainly on the conceptual side. The conceptual side mainly integrate ideas, what concepts, they need to be more innovative. They are the long-term visualizers. They need to build a long-term strategy, where we should be in 5 years' time. These are the top people, the top management side. As a complement to the above, nowadays we are mentioning also the diagnostic skills and the analytical skills.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because we need to understand the problems, we need to develop additional skills, how we are going to identify these kind of gaps, and we need the analytical skills. The analytical skills mainly where we identify the variables which were taking place, new parameters which may influence our business, and how we are going to analyze them. For example, we have a number of procedures which takes place. They are all documented, we have everything. We know the skills required for those kind of procedures. What happens if we automate part of them? Are we going to have people? Do we need different skills by our people? We need training, we need to engage new people, we need to study all these sort of parameters which may influence the outcome of our organization.
Okay. Okay. Would you say there are any methodologies or techniques or even steps in problem solving?
There are several techniques and methodologies available on the market. Some of them depends on the business model that we have. Some of them are general. One of the important things is when we identify that there is a problem, or we know that there may be a problem, we set up a plan B.
Mm-hmm.
Do not just be on your peace of mind with plan A and that's all. If something happens, how we're going to change our behavior, how we're going to change our business model. If someone else starts producing something which was solely produced by us, what's going to happen? We need to be prepared for these kind of things. There is a simple problem solving which is divided into 7 steps. Mainly, we identify the issue, and it's important to identify what the problem is. Unless we identify the problem, we cannot achieve any different results or different benefits. Sometimes it's difficult to identify problems, either because we don't want to adapt or take it as our responsibility that there is a problem, or we take it for granted that we always have been successful and we are going always to be successful. We need to understand everyone's interest. When we mention everyone's interest, it's the organization, top management, ourselves, our staff that we are managing. We need to take care of all the parameters around us. We need to identify different solutions, and how we are going to identify or do exercises to identify different solutions. We mentioned JET sessions in one of our sessions, where you get people all around the table and you start exchanging ideas and make people talk and share their ideas. You are not the people you bring over, don't bring people just to be as observants. Bring people who can give something and give some return back to the organization. Select options, the best options, and try to evaluate the risks associated. It's important once we agree on something that we are going to do, how we're going to proceed, we define the agreements, take a note for record, write them somewhere, which are available to those who are participating in those meetings to evaluate the decisions taken. And agree on contingencies, how we're going to monitor and how we're going to evaluate what's going to happen. There are different techniques. For example, the cause and effect relationship. The cause and effect relationship, for example, one of the examples that we give is when you have an iceberg. On the top, you are just seeing 10% of the iceberg, but the underneath 90%, you are not. It's not visual, and sometimes the problems are like that. You are just visualizing the 10% of the problem, and the 90%, it's not being visualized, or you are not being aware when it started or from where it started. There are other solving other techniques and methods. For example, we mentioned the fishbone structure, which was developed by a Japanese person called Ishikawa, where it's totally like a fishbone. You have in the middle a straight line where you identify the problem, and through that problem you start drawing the causes which are creating that problem. It's important to visualize sometimes and to draw, because when you draw and visualize what's happening, it's much easier to identify the causes which are creating that particular problem. A local professor, Professor Edward Abono, he wrote a book which is called The Six Thinking Hats, where in his method of the 6 thinking hats, he identifies how people can change their role and think from different aspects, how to look at the problem. Because sometimes when you are, for example, an outsider of the problem, you visualize it in a different way from the person who used to be living within that problem. And it's really important, because sometimes the results and the changes which needs to be applied, they are totally insignificant or very easy, but having someone else looking at the problem in a different way, it helps a lot. There are the JET sessions we already mentioned, and in Six Sigma there is something which is called FMEA, which is mainly failure mode and defects analysis. It's being used in the Six Sigma and even in lean methodologies. Lean is one of the methodologies within the Agile, but lean was developed in Japan by Toyota, where they focus on producing what's required. What's not required, don't produce it, because it's an extra expense, you don't need it, it's going to be extra investment, which is relatively not investment, but a cost. It's important when doing such exercises not to let people influence all the way the negative influence. Why? Because the negative influence will not create results. It just creates grumbling of people around you. And we end up with all people saying what they want without saying what we can do. There is another technique which it's quite old as well, this decision-making techniques. Decision-making technique, it's mainly focused on flowcharts. We used to learn them at school, where you have the yes and no decisions, which flow we can go, which route we can apply. And sometimes it's even another technique when we draw. Because when we draw, we visualize things different. Sometimes even using different colors, boards, sticky notes, like this.
My next question is more broader in scope. What would you say are the challenges in the 21st century?
The 21st century, it's offering different challenges because of the technology around us, mainly. The technology is influencing people in a different way. We had mentioned in different earlier sessions that the millennials, for example, they don't need their office. They don't need someone to ask them to do something specific. Assign them a task, assign them a small project, leave it to them, and they will surely give you the best results. But don't ask me, for example, to be in the office at 8 in the morning. I want to be in the office when I want. I do my task and out. The main difference, for example, some time ago I was watching a YouTube video. And there was this guru who was talking about his his behavior and his past experience within a particular organization. And what was happening, he used to be in the office either early, late, as he wished. But he delivered all his tasks. But his manager, who was the old-fashioned manager, wanted him to be sharp 8 in the morning till 5. And he was thinking of resigning from the organization. And during his resignation period, he decided to be in the office from 8 till 5. But during his presence in his office, he was always watching movies. And the manager, after 15 days, called him in his office, and he was thinking that he knew about what he was doing. But he was appraised because he was being in the office from 8 till 5. Not because he was delivering something, but because he was complementing what the manager wanted.
So my next question relates to the difference between leadership and management. I know that you had mentioned it before. If we could go into a bit more detail.
Yes, so mainly leadership, it's mainly the behavior between the manager and the people, the staff that you have within your team or within your remit. Management, it's much more on the higher level where they focus on the mission statement, the main objectives that need to be done, but not on the tactical aspect, how they are going to be done. Mainly managers, they need to be more strategic, while leaders need to lead people. They need to lead people, you need followers. In fact, Peter Drucker states that the only definition of a leader is someone who has followers. If you don't have followers, you're not a leader. It's like an army. If you are marching on your own, you're not a leader. You are just a single soldier marching on your own. There were different people, Bill Gates, Warren Bennis, who identify leadership, but mainly they all focus on leadership as being the person who lead other people. For example, Bill Gates states, as we look ahead into the next century, leaders will be those people who empower others. So you have to identify and create followers. How do you create believers, followers? It's mainly a social influence. You don't have to be an introvert person, otherwise you will not create followers. You need to be open, talk to people, communicate well, accept challenges, appraise challenges actually, because challenges are very important, and give feedback. Don't just let people talk. You are going to listen, but you need to give feedback. Someone comes into your office or send you an email so that he will have some feedback or a backward email to you.
Okay. And what would you say is the most used leadership theory?
One of the most important and most common is the LMX, the Leadership Member Exchange Theory. It initially, when it was developed, it was limited. But later, for example, Dulebon in 2016 identified other inputs within the LMX theory. And for example, him started mentioning the contextual variables, how we set our working schemes, location participants, which are all inputs within the LMX theory. The LMX theory on its own doesn't state any consequences or outcomes from it. And the same person, in fact, identifies the outcomes. For example, the turnover, the profit, the overall job satisfaction. He mentioned these kind of techniques and functions that we have to look into, which are all built on the LMX theory.
And what would you say are the essential skills required in leading and managing?
So, mainly the essential skills of leadership, we can identify four. Organizational management skills, good communication, good in analyzing and strategic planning, and how to create or visualize the way ahead. It's important, the last one, for me, it's one of the important things, where you need to be innovative, create innovation to your people, create different setups, create different setups to be much more efficient in your production, more effective, which are also influenced, for example, by health and safety rules. So you need to adopt to outside influences and adopt them to within your organization, within your behavior that's taking place within the organization. Mainly I associate a leader with the vision. He is a change agent, risk taker, and focus on personal growth. While a manager, he looks at the goals that needs to be achieved, the risk controller, how we are going to control risk, who is going to take responsibility, what systems require, the existing skills, and how we are going to direct. While the leader focuses as well on the coaching and how you are going to mentor people to be better and to achieve more from them.
So the relational aspect there.
Exactly. The relation is totally different. In fact, the leadership applies so great communication, a different style from management.
So, and my last question for today, Dr. Malia, is in the 21st century, is the leadership perspective evolving or changing?
It's evolving rather than changing. Change, it's something drastic, but evolution, yes, even people evolve by time. For example, we have the authoritative leaders who are detailed oriented. We have the authentic executives who are much more family oriented. The forerunners who look forward on what they can do. They are never happy on what they achieve. They want to achieve more in a different way. We have the coaching leaders who are creating different culture, behavior within their team, within their organization. We have the problem solvers we always had, which we call them coercive leaders. We have the group think model, where we share culture, share ideas, set up meetings, as we stated before, on like the agile methodologies, which help a lot in creating communication and feedback. And finally, we have the democratic leader, which mainly focus on the feedback. We cannot isolate these type of leaderships. It's a mixture. It's important to have mixtures. It's a mixture of ideas, and it's important in all aspects to create communication and feedback.
Okay. Well, that pretty much concludes the questions I have for you today, Dr. Malia. I would like to thank you for your time and thank you for being with us today. Thanks.
Thank you.
So there you have it. Today we spoke with Dr. Malia about managing organizations and people. Our key topics were discussing the different roles involved in management, the skills involved, the functions of management. We even spoke about governance and leadership and the difference between leadership and management, as well as different trends and changes in the 21st century to the theories. Thank you for your time. We'll see you next time.